If you think your family drama is bad, wait until you hear how my own daughter-in-law publicly destroyed my life over a plate of steak. Evil old woman. You shouldn't come here. Those were the exact words she screamed right before she slammed my dinner plate onto the floor, shattering it into a million pieces. But let's go back to the beginning. My name is Evelyn. For years, I truly believed I had a picture-perfect family. My son Ethan is a highly successful architect, a boy I sacrificed everything to raise as a single mother. And his wife Chloe? She always played the part of the sweet, quiet, innocent girl next door. Looking back now, the warning signs were flashing red, but I chose to ignore them. It was always in the way she smiled, or rather didn't smile. It was in her polite, tight-lipped expressions and the icy coldness that entered the room whenever Ethan stepped out. I thought she was just shy. I was dead wrong. Tonight was supposed to be a night of pure joy. Ethan had just landed a massive promotion at his firm, and we were celebrating at a high-end, five-star restaurant downtown. I wore my absolute best dress, my heart bursting with pride. I couldn't wait to raise a glass and toast to my son's hard work and bright future. I arrived early, sitting in the plush velvet booth, watching the candlelight flicker. When I saw them walk through the door, I waved, a huge smile on my face. I thought we were there to celebrate a milestone. I had absolutely no idea that I hadn't been invited to a celebration. I had been lured into a carefully calculated trap, and the monster behind it was already staring right at me. As they walked toward my table, I stood up, my arms open for a hug, ready to embrace the daughter-in-law I thought I knew. But the look on Chloe's face wasn't one of celebration. It was a cold, calculated mask of hostility. She didn't meet my eyes. She didn't smile. She just stood there, looking past me as if I were a piece of furniture she wanted to throw away. When I reached out, she didn't just step back. She physically recoiled, as if my touch would contaminate her. "Hi, Evelyn," she muttered, her voice dripping with venomous indifference. "Not Mom. Not hi, Evelyn, it's good to see you." Just my name, stripped of any warmth. I felt my face flush with embarrassment, standing there in the middle of a crowded, high-end restaurant with my arms hanging uselessly at my sides. Then there was Ethan, my son. He was completely oblivious, buried in his phone, checking work emails or stocks. He didn't see the rejection. He didn't see the way Chloe's eyes darted around the room, scanning for an audience. To him, this was just dinner. To me, the air in that room had suddenly turned suffocating, thick with a tension I couldn't explain. I took a shaky breath and sat back down, trying to play it cool. The waiter arrived, menus in hand, asking for our drink orders. I looked at Chloe, hoping for just one sign of normalcy. She looked at me, then at the menu, and then whispered something to Ethan that made him chuckle. But she didn't smile. She was waiting. I didn't know what for yet, but sitting there I realized one terrifying thing. I was entirely alone at this table. The waiter left after taking our drink orders, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence behind. I took a sip of my water, trying to steady my racing heart. That's when Chloe leaned in. The lighting in the restaurant was soft, but the look in her eyes was sharp enough to draw blood. "Must be nice," she whispered, her voice low, dripping with venom. "To have nothing to do all day but spend your son's money, Evelyn." I froze the glass midair. I felt a sudden rush of heat hit my face. "Excuse me," I whispered back, my voice trembling. "Chloe, I worked for 40 years. I paid for my own retirement, and if I recall correctly, I actually helped the two of you with the down payment on your house." I kept my voice down, desperately trying not to make a scene in such a beautiful place. I expected her to back off. Instead, she let out a sharp, bitter laugh, a sound so cold it made the hairs on my neck stand up. "Oh, please," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "A down payment? That was a handout to control us. You always want to be the martyr, don't you? The poor, lonely mother." I looked at Ethan, praying he would look up from his phone, praying he would hear how his wife was treating the woman who raised him. But Ethan just swiped his screen, completely deaf to the psychological war breaking out 2 feet away from him. He smiled at a text, totally lost in his own world. I realized then that Chloe knew exactly what she was doing. She was testing my limits, pushing me to my breaking point, right under my son's nose. And the appetizers hadn't even arrived yet. The tension was broken, or rather masked, by the sudden arrival of the waiter bearing our appetizers. Beautiful plates of tuna tartare and calamari were set between us. Ethan finally locked his phone and looked up, rubbing his hands together. "Wow, this looks incredible," he said, completely blind to the fact that my hands were shaking. "Is everything okay here? You guys look quiet." Before I could open my mouth to speak, Chloe's face transformed. The cold, bitter woman from 2 seconds ago vanished, replaced by a sweet, beaming wife. She reached out and patted Ethan's hand. "Everything is perfect, honey," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "Your mom was just reminding me of how generous she is. You know, how she funded our life." The sarcasm was so thick it made my stomach churn. I looked at Ethan, my eyes pleading with him to notice the sharp twist of her words. "Chloe, that's not what I said," I began, but she cut me off with a soft, patronizing sigh. "Oh, Evelyn, don't worry, we know. We are so grateful for your charity." Ethan just chuckled, taking a bite of his food. "Come on, Mom, don't start," he said carelessly. "Let's just have a good night. Don't start." The words felt like a slap in the face. My own son was gaslighting me, programmed by years of his wife's subtle manipulations. I looked down at my plate, the elegant food now looking like ash. I realized that if I defended myself, I would be the crazy, dramatic mother ruining his big night. If I stayed silent, I was letting Chloe rewrite history. I was trapped and Chloe knew it. Her eyes locked onto mine, gleaming with dark victory. About 10 minutes later, Ethan's phone buzzed again. He checked it and stood up. "Excuse me, ladies, I have to take this call from the firm." "It'll just be a minute," he said, walking away toward the quieter lobby. The moment his back was turned, the sweet, doting smile wiped completely off Chloe's face. She leaned across the small table, her shadow falling over me. The softness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a wild, burning hatred that made my blood run cold. "I know what you did, Evelyn," she hissed, her voice a sharp, quiet dagger. "You think you're so clever, don't you? I saw the text messages you sent Ethan last week. I know you told him he made a massive mistake marrying me. You bitter old witch." I gasped, completely stunned by the sheer madness of her words. "What? I never said that," I whispered back, my heart pounding against my ribs. "He told me you two were fighting about finances, and I simply texted him to communicate better with you. I was trying to help your marriage, Chloe." She let out a soft, mocking scoff, tilting her head. "Oh, save the innocent act. You've been trying to tear us apart from day one." I looked around, terrified that someone would notice her wild expression, but the ambient chatter of the restaurant drowned us out. Chloe wasn't listening to logic. She had built a twisted reality in her mind where I was the ultimate villain. "You're going to pay for trying to ruin my life, Evelyn," she whispered, her eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying promise. "Just watch." Before I could process the threat, I saw Ethan walking back. The very second Ethan's shadow fell over our table, Chloe's face snapped back into a look of pure innocence. The chilling threat she had just whispered vanished as if it never happened. "Everything okay with the firm, sweetie?" she asked, her voice dripping with honey. Ethan slid back into the booth, nodding. "Yeah, just some minor details about the new project. Everything's under control." Right on cue, 2 waiters appeared, carrying large, heavy ceramic plates. The aroma of garlic butter and perfectly seared beef filled the air as a beautiful, expensive steak was placed directly in front of me. "Enjoy your dinner, ladies and gentlemen," the waiter murmured politely before slipping away. Ethan smiled, picking up his steak knife. "Man, I've been waiting for this all day. Dig in, Mom." But I couldn't move. I sat there completely frozen under the warm, fancy restaurant lights. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs I was convinced they could hear it. I stared at the heavy plate in front of me, and then my eyes drifted up to Chloe. She wasn't looking at her food. She was staring directly at me, her eyes locked onto mine, a small twisted smirk growing on the corner of her lips. The psychological warfare was suffocating. I felt trapped in a nightmare, suffocating in a room full of laughing, chatting strangers. If I screamed for help, I would look like the crazy one. If I stayed silent, I was waiting for the trap to spring. I reached out a trembling hand toward my silverware, trying to pretend everything was normal. I had no idea that my trembling hand was about to trigger the ultimate disaster. My fingers wrapped around the silver knife, but my hands were shaking so violently that I could barely hold it. I tried to press the blade into the steak, but my grip failed. The heavy metal knife slipped from my numb fingers, clattering loudly against the porcelain plate, then bouncing onto the wine glass. Clink! The sharp noise echoed sharply over the quiet chatter of the surrounding tables. That tiny noise was all it took. In an instant, Chloe snapped. The illusion of the sweet, quiet daughter-in-law evaporated into thin air. She didn't just get angry. She completely unraveled. With a sudden violent movement, she stood up so fast that her heavy wooden chair flew backward, screeching against the floorboards. The entire section of the restaurant fell dead silent. Dozens of eyes instantly locked onto our table. Ethan froze, a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. "Chloe? What are you doing? Sit down," he hissed, his face turning bright red with sudden embarrassment. But Chloe didn't hear him. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving, her eyes dilated with an unhinged rage that looked almost demonic under the soft restaurant lighting. She looked at Ethan, then down at me, her hands clenching into tight fists. I looked up at her, paralyzed by a wave of pure terror. I wanted to apologize, to say it was just an accident, but the words caught in my throat. The air around our table felt heavy, charged with a dangerous electricity. Chloe slowly reached her hands out toward the edge of my table setting, her fingers twitching. I realized, with a sickening jolt in my stomach, that the trap had finally sprung. Before Ethan or I could even process what was happening, Chloe's hands clamped onto the edges of my heavy ceramic plate. With a terrifying guttural screech, she hoisted the entire dish, the massive steak, the potatoes, the dark wine sauce, and slammed it violently onto the hardwood floor right next to my feet. Smash! The sound of the thick porcelain shattering was like a gunshot in the silent restaurant. Shards of sharp ceramic and hot food exploded everywhere. Greasy gravy and meat splattered across the floor, and a huge wave of dark sauce flew upward, staining the front of my favorite cream-colored dress. I screamed, instinctively pulling my legs back, my heart nearly stopping from the sheer shock. But she wasn't done. Chloe leaned over the table, her face just inches away from mine. Her eyes were completely bloodshot, filled with a twisted, manic satisfaction. And then she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Evil old woman! You shouldn't come here. You ruin everything." The entire restaurant gasped in unison. People stood up from their booths to get a better look. Gasps of horror rippled through the crowd, and I could feel 100 eyes burning into me. I sat there frozen, covered in food, with tears of absolute humiliation welling up in my eyes. I looked over at my son, waiting for him to finally protect me, waiting for him to put an end to this madness. The heavy ring of the shattered plate faded, replaced by an agonizing buzz of whispers. "Oh my God, did she just throw that?" a woman nearby gasped. I could feel every camera phone in the room shifting toward us. I sat paralyzed, the warm steak sauce soaking into the fabric of my dress, heavy tears finally spilling down my cheeks. The public humiliation was a physical weight, crushing the air out of my lungs. From the corner of my eye, I saw the restaurant manager rushing toward our table, flanked by 2 security guards. The elegant, 5-star atmosphere had degenerated into a cheap circus sideshow, and I was the main attraction. Chloe was still standing, hyperventilating, her eyes darting around as if looking for approval from the crowd. She wasn't ashamed. She looked proud of the chaos she had just unleashed. I slowly turned my head toward Ethan, my son, the boy I had spent 25 years protecting, feeding, and loving with every ounce of my soul. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to grab Chloe's arm, to demand an apology, to yell at her for treating his mother like garbage. I just needed him to say one thing to defend me, just one word to show me I wasn't alone. But Ethan didn't move. He kept his head down, staring at the mess on the floor, his shoulders trembling. When he finally looked up, his eyes weren't filled with rage at his wife. They were filled with resentment toward me. He looked embarrassed, not of Chloe's violent outburst, but of my tear-stained face. He opened his mouth, and the words that came out broke my heart worse than any shattered porcelain ever could. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes cutting into me like glass. "Mom, why do you always have to provoke her?" he yelled, his voice cracking, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "You know she's been under a lot of stress with work. Did you really have to push her to this point on my celebration night?" I felt the air leave my body. The manager and the security guards arrived at the table, but their voices faded into static. All I could hear was the ringing in my ears. He was blaming me. The baby boy I raised alone, the boy I worked 2 jobs to put through college, was taking the side of the woman who had just publicly assaulted his own mother. I looked at Chloe. The heavy breathing had stopped. The manic rage in her eyes dissolved, replaced by a smug, victorious grin. She knew she had won. She had completely brainwashed my son, turning him into a weapon against me. She leaned back into the booth, crossing her arms, looking down at me covered in food as if I were a cockroach she had successfully crushed. In that agonizing moment, something inside me broke, but something else hardened. The blinding sadness washed away, leaving behind a cold, clear reality. I looked at Ethan's defensive posture and Chloe's arrogant smile. I realized that my son was no longer my son. He was a stranger, and I was completely done trying to save him. I didn't scream. I didn't cry another tear. I simply reached into my purse, pulled out a linen napkin, and calmly wiped the dark wine sauce from my arm. The manager was hovering, apologizing profusely, but I ignored him. I stood up, adjusting my stained dress, holding my head high. I looked at Ethan, then at Chloe, whose smug smile suddenly faltered under my cold gaze. "You two deserve each other," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and deadly calm. It echoed louder than Chloe's scream. I didn't wait for Ethan's response. I turned my back on them, walking past the shattered porcelain, past the security guards, and out of that restaurant. I walked with as much dignity as a woman covered in food could muster, ignoring the pitying stares of the entire dining room. The cold night air hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk. I pulled out my phone and called an Uber. While waiting under the streetlights, I didn't hesitate. I opened my contacts. Ethan, blocked. Chloe, blocked. In less than 10 seconds, I erased them from my digital life. As the car pulled up, I looked at my stained reflection in the window and smiled. I was free, and they had no idea what they had just lost. Karma didn't just knock on their door. It kicked it down. Another diner had filmed Chloe's entire unhinged meltdown and posted it online. Within 48 hours, the video went viral. Ethan's boss saw it, and by Monday morning, my son was fired for bringing public disrepute to the firm. His career as an architect was ruined in 60 seconds. Without his income, their fragile world shattered. Ethan used a stranger's phone to leave me a sobbing voicemail. He begged for a loan, crying that they were facing foreclosure on their house, and that Chloe was threatening to divorce him. He kept whining. "Mom, please, we have nothing left." I listened to his pathetic excuses, felt absolutely zero pity, and blocked that number too. Right now, I am sitting in the airport, sipping a glass of champagne. My house is sold, my bank account is full, and I have a one-way ticket to Hawaii. They wanted the evil old woman gone? Well, they got their wish. They thought I was the anchor dragging them down, but they forgot I was the only thing keeping them afloat. Enjoy the wreckage, kids. I'm finally living my life.